Poland, trapped between two major powers, Germany to the west and the Soviet Union to the east. With strategic alliances and defense plans in place, they hoped to withstand an attack. But in just over a month, the country was torn apart. How did this happen so quickly? On September 1, 1939, Germany launched a full-scale invasion of Poland. While German forces were stronger, they didn't have a massive numerical advantage. So how did they manage to crush Poland in just over a month? Germany had two key advantages: a larger army with better equipment and the use of blitzkrieg tactics, a fast and overwhelming military strategy involving tanks, planes, and motorized infantry. These allowed them to move quickly, delivering hard-hitting strikes that Poland could not counter effectively. To counter these German advantages, Poland developed two main strategies. First, they formed alliances with Britain and France, expecting that these powers would put pressure on Germany from the west. This would force Germany to split its forces, making it harder to mount a strong attack against Poland. Second, Poland set up two defensive lines. The main defense was behind the Vistula River, with plans to retreat to the Romanian bridgehead if things got bad. However, there was a major problem. Poland couldn't start the war with all of its troops deployed behind these defensive lines. If they did, there was a risk that Germany could take parts of the country without much resistance, which might delay Britain and France from declaring war. To prevent this, Poland stationed its forces closer to the border, hoping to trigger a German attack and quickly get support from its allies. On September 1, 1939, the Germans launched their attack along the entire front. Polish forces tried to hold their ground at an intermediary defensive line, but in the north, the Germans encircled some units and reconnected with East Prussia. Meanwhile, in the south, German tanks attacked the southernmost part of Poland's defensive line. Though the Poles managed to contain the Germans in the center and south, their lines were broken in the north. Polish reserves were rushed to cover the northern sector, and forces in the south were pulled back to regroup. However, the fast-moving German tanks quickly pursued the retreating Polish forces, making it difficult for them to reorganize. As Polish forces retreated, they ran into increasing trouble. The Germans continued their advance, and Polish units struggled to maintain a solid defensive front. In the north, the reserves held the line for a few days, but German tanks broke through again. This time, there were no Polish reserves left to stop them. In desperation, Polish forces launched a counterattack to slow down the German advance and allow their troops to withdraw to the Warsaw area. However, many of the Polish units were too disorganized to mount an effective counteroffensive. In the south, Polish forces were encircled, and their situation grew more dire by the day. The Polish counterattack in the north succeeded in temporarily slowing the Germans, allowing some Polish troops to reach Warsaw. But soon after, the Germans turned their attention toward the counterattacking forces and cut them off. By now, the Germans had achieved their goal, cutting off the bulk of the Polish army before they could reach their main defenses. Around September 10, 1939, the Germans breached Poland's main defensive line from the north. The Poles had misjudged the situation, and their troops were out of position, allowing the Germans to find a weak spot and cross the river. Attempts to regroup behind another river line failed, as the Germans used their momentum to cross it before the Poles could establish defenses. The main Polish defensive line was now fully breached from the north. Just as things seemed to be at their worst on September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. This was part of a secret deal made with Germany in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Soviet invasion crushed any remaining hope for the Polish forces. With no defenses on the Eastern Front, Polish troops were forced to fight on two sides. The Soviets advanced rapidly, cutting off Polish forces trying to retreat south to the Romanian bridgehead. Polish units had only one option. They had to break through either the German or Soviet lines. They chose to attack the Germans, but the attempt failed, and the remaining Polish formations surrendered. Without support from Britain or France and surrounded on all sides, Warsaw fell to the Germans on September 28. By early October 1939, both the Germans and the Soviets had crushed the last pockets of Polish resistance. The country was effectively partitioned between the two powers. Germany took control of the western part, including major cities like Warsaw and Krakow, while the Soviets occupied the eastern territories. This marked the tragic end of Poland's struggle, as it was divided and occupied by its two powerful neighbors. The reasons for Poland's rapid defeat are clear. Poland's strategy depended heavily on early support from Britain and France, but this help never arrived. At the same time, Poland had to sacrifice its stronger defensive positions near the Vistula to ensure that its allies would join the fight. This left the Polish army vulnerable to Germany's superior speed and strength. German tanks and fast-moving divisions, combined with blitzkrieg tactics, overwhelmed Poland's defenses. Meanwhile, the Soviet invasion sealed Poland's fate, trapping its forces and cutting off any hope of retreat or reinforcements. Poland's brave resistance ended in just over a month, a testament to the devastating power of Germany's military machine and the dire consequences of being caught between two great powers. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll explore another lesser-known but critical conflict between two major world powers.